Story 1. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. Frozen terror in the Ural Mountains. Russia, 1959. Deep in the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia in January 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers set out on what should have been a routine skiing expedition. Led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, the team included 8 men and 1 woman, all students or recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute. They were fit, prepared, and familiar with extreme winter conditions. Their goal was to reach Otorten Mountain, a challenging trek that would test their skills. They documented everything with cameras, diaries, and a shared journal. None of them would return alive. The group left Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement, on January 27th. They skied through deep snow, setting up camps each night. Their last known campsite was on the slopes of Kolatsyakl, Mountain of the Dead in the local Mansi language, on the night of February 1st. The weather turned brutal. Temperatures dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, -22 degrees Fahrenheit, with howling winds and blinding snow. But these were seasoned hikers. They had faced worse. Something happened that night that defies easy explanation. Around midnight or early morning of February 2nd, the hikers cut their tent open from the inside with knives and fled barefoot or in socks into the freezing darkness. They left behind warm clothing, food, boots, and their precious cameras and journals. No signs of struggle with outsiders, no bullet holes, no footprints from attackers other than their own. The tent was still standing but slashed open. Search parties found the first bodies weeks later. 2 hikers, Yuri Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko, were discovered near a cedar tree about 1.5 kilometers from the tent. They were barefoot, wearing only underwear, and had built a small fire. Their hands were badly burned from desperately trying to keep the flames alive. Branches high up the tree were broken, as if someone had climbed in panic. Autopsies showed they died of hypothermia, but with strange injuries. One had missing eyeballs, the other a missing tongue. Further up the slope, 3 more bodies, Rustem Slobodin, Igor Dyatlov, and Zenaida Kolmogorova, were found in a line, as if trying to crawl back to the tent. They had frostbite and internal injuries, but again, no external trauma that explained the force. Slobodin had a fractured skull. The last 4 hikers, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, were found in May when the snow melted, in a ravine deeper in the woods. Their bodies showed horrifying trauma. Dubinina had her tongue and eyes missing, massive chest fractures, ribs broken as if by a car crash, yet no bruising on the skin. And Thibault-Brignol had a depressed skull fracture. One theory suggests a slab avalanche, but why cut the tent and run without proper gear? Why the radiation traces on some clothing? Why the orange glow reported by witnesses in the sky that night? Official Soviet investigators concluded an overwhelming force killed them, but closed the case quickly, labeling it an act of nature. Conspiracy theories exploded. Military tests gone wrong. Yeti attacks, footprints too large for humans were reportedly seen. Infrasound causing panic, or even UFOs due to glowing orbs seen by other hikers in the area. Decades later, Russian authorities reopened the case. In 2020, they blamed a slab avalanche combined with hypothermia and poor decisions, but critics point out inconsistencies. The tent wasn't in an avalanche-prone spot. Injuries don't match typical avalanche trauma, and the hikers were too experienced to panic that way. Some bodies had high levels of radiation. Diaries mentioned bright orange spheres in the sky. The Dyatlov Pass remains one of the most terrifying unsolved mysteries because it strips away control. 9 strong, smart young people in the middle of nowhere, suddenly so terrified they fled their only shelter into certain death. What did they see or hear that made them slash their way out and run? Their frozen face, some with expressions of pure terror, haunt photos from the recovery. The mountain still claims lives occasionally. Hikers today report strange lights, unexplained sounds, and an oppressive feeling of being watched by something ancient and malevolent on the Mountain of the Dead. Story 2. The Hinterkaifeck Murders. The farm where the killer lived among them. Germany, 1922. On a remote farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, about 70 kilometers north of Munich, Germany, in March 1922, a family of 6 met a gruesome end with a mattock, a farming tool like a pickaxe. The victims were farmer Andreas Gruber, his wife Kazilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, and her 2 children, Kazilia and Josef, plus the new maid Maria Baumgartner, who had only arrived that day. The horror began days earlier with strange signs. Andreas found footprints in the snow leading from the woods to the barn, but none leaving. Tools went missing. He heard footsteps in the attic at night, but found nothing when he searched. The family dog barked incessantly toward the woods. Neighbors later said the family seemed on edge but didn't report anything to police, perhaps out of rural stoicism or fear. On the evening of March 31st, the killer struck. He or she hid in the barn or attic, waiting. First, he lured or forced the adults one by one into the barn. Andreas, Kazilia, the elder, and Victoria were killed with repeated mattock blows to the head. The children and maid were then attacked in the house. Little Josef was found in his crib, skull smashed. The young Kazilia had tried to hide under hay in the barn, but was discovered and killed. Maria, the maid, was murdered in her bed, her first and only night on the farm. The killer didn't flee immediately. For days he lived in the house. He fed the animals, milked the cows, and even cooked meals using the family's food. Neighbors saw smoke from the chimney and lights at night, but assumed the family was fine. The postman delivered mail and noticed nothing amiss at first. It wasn't until April 4th, when the family missed church and a neighbor investigated, that the bodies were found, decomposing, covered in blood, with a mattock still at the scene. Autopsies revealed the brutality: skulls crushed, faces mutilated. Strangely, the killer had arranged some bodies neatly. No clear motive. Robbery was ruled out as money, and valuables were left untouched. Suspects included a neighbor with a grudge or even Victoria's illegitimate child's father. But no one was ever charged. The case remains unsolved. What terrifies most is the intimacy and duration. The killer lived among the dead for days, tending the farm like nothing happened. Footprints and attic disturbances suggest he had been watching the family beforehand, perhaps for weeks, hiding in their own home. Today the farm is gone, but the story inspires horror. A killer who didn't just murder but moved in, ate their food, slept under their roof, and tended their livestock while the bodies cooled nearby. Story 3. The Enfield Poltergeist. The girl who levitated and spoke with a dead man's voice. London, 1977 to 1979. In a modest council house in Brimsdown, Enfield, North London, in August 1977, single mother Peggy Hodgson heard loud knocking sounds coming from the walls. She and her 4 children, Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy were terrified. Furniture moved on its own. Toys flew across rooms. But the real horror centered on 11-year-old Janet. Investigators from the Society for Psychical Research, including Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair, arrived and documented over 2,000 incidents over 18 months. Chairs levitated, beds shook violently, and Janet was often the focus. She was thrown from her bed, dragged by an invisible force, and once reportedly levitated horizontally in mid-air for several seconds, photographed by a newspaper reporter. The entity communicated through Janet in a deep, gravelly male voice, claiming to be Bill Wilkins, a former resident who had died in the house years earlier of a brain hemorrhage. The voice swore, gave accurate details about the house's history that a child couldn't know, and even predicted events. It said things like, "I am a man who used to live here," and described his death. Tape recordings captured the voice speaking while Janet's mouth was visibly still or full of water. Other phenomena. A fireplace ripped out of the wall, cold spots, apparitions of an old man, and objects like Lego bricks hurled with force. Neighbors and police witnessed events. One officer saw a chair slide across the floor unaided. The Hodgson family endured sleepless nights, injuries, and public skepticism. Some accused them of faking it for attention, but many incidents happened under strict observation. The case peaked with Janet's possession-like episodes, where she spoke as Bill, complaining about the living and demanding to be left alone. Eventually, the activity subsided after nearly 2 years. Skeptics point to possible ventriloquism or pranks by the girls, but the sheer volume of witnesses, recordings, and physical evidence, levitating furniture caught on film, makes it one of the most documented poltergeist cases ever. What makes it scary is the invasion of the home. A safe space turned chaotic by an unseen force using a child's body as a mouthpiece for the dead. Janet later said in interviews that it felt real and terrifying. The house still stands, and occasional reports of odd activity continue. The Enfield poltergeist inspired films like The Conjuring 2 and remains a benchmark for paranormal horror. Not a one-night haunting, but a prolonged siege by something that knew the family's secrets. Story 4. The Amityville Horror. Voices, Demons, and the House That Wouldn't Let Go. New York, 1975 to 1976. On November 13, 1974, in Amityville, Long Island, New York, 23-year-old Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. murdered his entire family, his parents, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters, while they slept in their beds at 112 Ocean Avenue. He used a .35 caliber rifle, shooting them execution style. DeFeo claimed voices in the house told him to do it. He was convicted and remains in prison. A year later, in December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz bought the Dutch colonial house at a bargain price, moving in with their 3 young children despite knowing the murder history. Almost immediately, strange things began. Green slime oozed from walls, swarms of flies appeared in winter, cold spots and foul odors filled rooms. George woke at 3:15 a.m. every night, the exact time of the DeFeo murders. The family reported demonic apparitions, a hooded figure, a pig-like creature with red eyes, Jody, and a levitating bed. Kathy felt invisible hands grabbing her. The children saw glowing eyes outside windows, doors slammed, windows opened and closed, and a crucifix rotated upside down and burned. George found himself drawn to the basement, where he discovered a red room hidden behind a wall, matching stories of satanic activity or a gateway. They consulted demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, who confirmed a demonic infestation. After 28 days of escalating terror, including George seeing his face transform into a demonic visage in mirrors and the family experiencing personality changes, they fled, leaving most belongings behind. The Lutzes later detailed the events in a best-selling book and movies. While some investigators claim the Lutzes exaggerated or fabricated parts for profit, they worked with DeFeo's lawyer. Police reports, neighbor accounts, and physical evidence, photos of damage, slime residue, lend credibility. Subsequent owners reported disturbances too, though less severe. The house still stands, renumbered and remodeled, but many refuse to live there long. The true horror lies in the idea that evil lingers in a place, murders awakening something ancient and malevolent that preys on a new family, turning their dream home into a nightmare of possession and fear. Voices whispering at night, urging violence, a house that remembers and corrupts. Story 5. The Keddie Cabin Murders. The Unsolved Slaughter in the Sierra Nevada, California, 1981. In the remote pine-shrouded mountains of Plumas County, California, the small community of Keddie was a quiet place in the early 1980s. Cabins dotted the landscape near Lake Almanor, offering cheap rentals for working-class families trying to rebuild their lives. Cabin 28 stood at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by thick woods that blocked out much of the daylight even in spring. It was here, on the night of April 11th, 1981, that one of America's most brutal and baffling unsolved mass murders unfolded, a crime so savage it felt like something from a slasher film, yet rooted in cold, horrifying reality. Sue Sharp, a 36-year-old mother recently separated and struggling financially, had moved into Cabin 28 with her 5 children in late 1980. The cabin was modest, a main living area, kitchen, 2 small bedrooms, and a basement. On that fateful Saturday, the family included Sue, her daughter Sheila, sons John and Dana, 17, visiting from nearby, and younger children Tina, Rick, and Greg. The older boys had been out most of the day, and the evening seemed ordinary at first. Neighbors recalled hearing laughter and music from the cabin. A teenage friend, Justin Eason, also 14, was staying over with the younger boys in the basement. Sometime after 10 p.m., the horror began. The killer, or killers, entered the cabin, likely through an unlocked door or window in the isolated setting. What followed was a frenzy of violence that left the main floor drenched in blood. Sue Sharp was found in the living room, her throat slashed so deeply that her head was nearly severed. She had been bound with electrical cord and tape, then beaten and stabbed repeatedly. Her face showed signs of being struck with a hammer or similar blunt object. Next to her lay her daughter, Tina, who had been strangled with a wire or cord and stabbed multiple times. The scene was one of unimaginable savagery. Blood spattered the walls, ceiling, and furniture. Furniture was overturned and there were signs of a struggle, yet the attack was eerily contained to the main area. In the adjacent bedroom, 15-year-old John and his friend Dana were discovered. Both had been brutally beaten with a hammer or claw hammer. The weapon was never definitively identified, but fragments suggested it. Their skulls crushed. Dana had defensive wounds on his hands and arms, indicating he fought back desperately. John suffered similar trauma. The killers used whatever was at hand, knives from the kitchen, cords from appliances, to bind and torture their victims. The brutality suggested rage, but also a level of control. No random shooting, but up-close personal violence that took time. The younger children, Rick, Greg, and Justin, were in the basement and somehow survived the night. They later told investigators they heard muffled noises and thuds from upstairs, but stayed hidden, too terrified to move. In the morning, Sheila returned from a sleepover at a neighbor's cabin and made the gruesome discovery. She ran screaming for help. The scene that greeted law enforcement was nightmarish. Bodies posed or left in unnatural positions, blood pooling on the floor, and a sense of interrupted domestic life. Dinner plates still on the table, a partially eaten meal. But the true terror deepened with what was missing. 12-year-old Tina Sharp was gone. Her body was not in the cabin. A massive search of the surrounding woods, cabins, and lake turned up nothing at first. Her remains were not found until 1984, over 3 years later, when a skull and other bones were discovered in a remote area near Feather Falls, about 50 miles away. Autopsy confirmed she had been stabbed and strangled, consistent with the others. How she was transported that far without detection remains unknown. The investigation was plagued from the start. Plumas County Sheriff's Department had limited resources. The crime scene was not properly secured. Neighbors and even some family members walked through the blood before full processing. Key evidence, like a bloody hammer found outside and a kitchen knife, was mishandled or lost. Anonymous tips flooded in, but leads went cold quickly. A bloody footprint and unknown fingerprints were recovered, but no matches. Suspects emerged over the years. One theory pointed to a group of local men with criminal histories, including Marty Smart and his associates. Smart, who lived nearby, had a violent past and allegedly made incriminating statements. A letter he wrote to his therapist hinted at involvement, and his hammer went missing around the time of the murders. Another man, Beau Boubade, a friend of Smart with alleged ties to organized crime, was also scrutinized. Justin, the surviving boy, later recalled under hypnosis seeing men with hammers and knives attacking the family, describing details that matched the scene. However, the hypnosis was controversial, and no charges were ever filed against the main suspects, despite a 2016 documentary and renewed interest that named them publicly. The case inspired the horror film The Strangers, in part due to the random yet brutal home invasion feel. But the reality was worse. A family slaughtered in their own cabin, a child abducted and killed elsewhere, and the killers vanishing into the night without clear motive. Robbery? Personal grudge? Something darker. Money and valuables were left behind, but some items were taken. The cabin's isolation meant screams might not have carried far, especially with the wind through the pines. Decades later, the case remains officially unsolved, though Plumas County authorities have revisited it with new technology. The surviving Sharp children, now adults, have fought for justice, speaking out about the botched investigation and the lingering trauma. Cabin 28 was eventually demolished, but the site and surrounding woods still draw curiosity seekers and amateur investigators. Hikers report an oppressive atmosphere, unexplained sounds at night, and the feeling of being watched from the tree line. Some claim to see shadowy figures near where the cabin once stood, or hear children's voices calling in the distance. What makes the Keddy cabin murders truly terrifying is the vulnerability it exposes. A single mother trying to provide a fresh start for her kids in a peaceful mountain community, only for evil to walk through the door in the dead of night. The survivors hiding in the basement, listening to the slaughter above. A young girl taken into the darkness, her fate sealed miles away, and the killers, who may still be alive, walking free, never caught. In the quiet Sierra Nevada, some cabins may be gone, but the horror of that night lingers like the mountain fog, reminding us that safety is an illusion when monsters wear human faces.